This is an interview with Irwin I. Cohn, a prominent leader in the metropolitan Detroit community. In connection with the 75th anniversary celebration of the United Jewish Charities and the 50th anniversary of the Jewish Welfare Federation, these organizations have undertaken to record the memories and experiences of a number of community leaders which highlight developments in the organized Jewish community. This interview with Mr. Cohn is being taped in his office in July of 1975. The interviewer is Mary Baroff. Mr. Cohn, before we begin talking about your community activities, could you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where you were born, when you were born?
I was born in Detroit in 1896 and lived on the Lower East Side of Detroit for many years. The Jewish population lived primarily south of Gratiot and north of Gratiot. South of Gratiot, I would say, to the extent of 3 or 4 blocks, and north of Gratiot, 10 to 15 blocks. It was east of Woodward, and on the west, bounded really by Russell Street. At that time, there were about 4,000, 5,000, or 6,000 Jews in the entire community, and the population of Detroit was in the low hundreds of thousands. My parents came to Detroit direct from Lithuania in the early 1880s. My father really decided to leave Lithuania because at that time there was conscription in the army, and the Jewish men who entered the army were discriminated against and treated other than the average individual. And therefore, they did not want to enter into the army, and they migrated to the United States.
How did they select Detroit?
My father started out as a peddler of dry goods, carrying a pack on his back and traveling by train towards Monroe, Michigan. He would then go on foot from farmhouse to farmhouse and sell them his merchandise. He would stay at a farmhouse overnight. He left Detroit on a Sunday morning and would come back Friday in time for Shabbos and would stay over Shabbos. A large number of the immigrants who came to Detroit did the same thing, peddling in other areas. There were wholesale dry goods houses in Detroit owned by Jews, and they would give them credit. And this way, they made a living. As a result of all this, in the 1890s, my father went into the wholesale dry goods business himself and continued in the wholesale dry goods business until 1917, when he retired. The name of his company was the Detroit Dry Goods Wholesale Company.
Where was that located?
It was located on Gratiot Avenue, first east of Hastings Street and then west of Hastings Street. As a matter of fact, his first store was on Hastings Street, just north of Gratiot Avenue. He employed a horse and wagon to deliver merchandise to the various retailers who bought from him. I remember this distinctly. Also, there were quite a number of Jews living in Canada, Windsor, who peddled merchandise. And they would come over on Sunday morning and buy the merchandise from my father at his store, I remember distinctly. And they would take the merchandise back to Windsor, by means of the boat which went across the Detroit River. In order to avoid paying duty, they would wrap the merchandise around their bodies. And in that way, they entered Canada without paying any duty. A number of the prominent names in Canadian life and in Windsor are descendants of the people who were buying this merchandise. I remember as a kid going down to the store on a Sunday morning and watching these people come and buy the merchandise. My father was quite successful in the wholesale dry goods business, and a number of people in Detroit who later became prominent in Jewish life were employed by my father when they came to the United States. As a matter of fact, I know of two of them who ended up as presidents of Congregation Sharet Tzedek.
Who were they?
Ike Schetzer and Morris Zakheim. Ike Schetzer eventually ended up in the wholesale dry goods business himself. And this is the way life was carried on. I went to the local schools and walked quite a distance to go to grammar school and high school. I walked from High Street, which is now Verner Highway in Beaubien, to High and Grand River to go to school. Nobody thought of busing or anything to do with busing. Walked this distance, rain, snow, or good weather. It made no difference. I graduated from the Cass High School before it was a technical school. I then proceeded to go to the University of Michigan and graduated from the law school in 1917. Upon my graduation, I went to work for a very prominent firm in Detroit, consisted of one Jew and one non-Jew. And I worked for them for many years and got a great deal of experience, which stood me very well in my future practice. I became interested in Jewish life and in working with Jewish institutions and organizations through the fact that Mr. Ben Selling, who was my original boss, had served as president of Temple Bethel, had served as president of United Jewish Charities, and was a very prominent Jewish worker. As a result of all this, I became interested in the charities and in the Federation, and proceeded to work along that way.
Yeah. Could we backtrack just a little bit? I'd like to talk with you just a bit about the community, the Jewish community as it was during the period of your youth. We've talked a little bit about the economic way of life, the peddlers, the small businessmen in the area. But what was the social and cultural and religious atmosphere of the time?
The social life revolved around the synagogues. We had Congregation Sharet Tzedek, we had Temple Bethel, we had Congregation Beth Jacob, we had a shul below Gratiot Avenue known as the Mullet Street Shul, and life really revolved around the synagogues and the temples. And that's the way we carried on our life.
Do you remember anything of what the major needs for social resources were in the Jewish community?
Yes. The major work in the Jewish communities in my early life were to assist immigrants who came into the United States and to take care of the needy. We furnished medical service for the needy. We furnished them clothing, bed clothing, and items of that nature. And that was the principal work.
How were they furnished? What were
Well, they finally organized the United Jewish Charities. And through this organization, it became organized charity. And they had sewing circles. The women would sew. items for the poor people, would sew items for children that were born, furnish them diapers and things of that nature. And also the immigrants. They would try to get immigrants jobs, and they would supply them with the wherewithal to live while they were in need. And that was the principal charity.
Do you remember the facilities themselves that furnished you? For example, do you remember the High Street?
Oh yeah, I remember the beginning on High Street when they erected the Hannah Schloss building. The Schloss family were a wealthy family, comparatively speaking, and they built this beautiful brick building, and I think that the total cost was $12,500. And we had gymnasium there, and I played basketball with the Adriatic team there. I played baseball with the Adriatic team, and we were able to get showers. And I remember, I think a towel used to cost us a penny or 2 pennies. And that was the center of activities for the average Jewish boy that was on High, just west of Hastings Street. And all of the kids had one good time there. We had manual training there, and we had an athletic director. We had wonderful basketball teams of different ages, and it became the entire center of the Jewish youth.
So that actually, probably many of the people that you know today were people that you knew through your activities.
Oh yes, very much so. Yes, it was really a beehive of activity.
Let me ask you this: who were some of the leaders of the Jewish community at the time of?
The leaders of the Jewish community were David W. Simons, who was a wealthy man. As a matter of fact, controlled a bank in Hamtramck, which was a little village then, or area. He was president of Schwartz and Cohn for many years. He was elected an alderman in the city of Detroit. And was a man of good heart, and a man who used his money to help everybody. Period. There was a man named Bernard Ginsberg, who at that time was a wealthy man, whose name was uppermost in the minds of all Jews because of the good he did. His daughter still lives in the city of Detroit, Mrs. Julian Krolik, and Bernard Ginsberg was really one of the outstanding Jews at that time. There were the Slomans. Adolf Sloman was a very prominent lawyer, an outstanding individual. He has grandchildren in the community.
Are they active in community activities?
Not to a great extent. There was Monroe Rosenfeld. I remember him distinctly. His son is I think the choir leader in Temple Bethel now. See? And he was an outstanding man. There was the Krolik family, who were outstanding Jews in the community, did a lot of good. They were in the wholesale dry goods business. And you could go along, there were a large number of people who really lent their time, effort, and attention to the welfare of the Jewish community.
Did they mostly contribute through the United Jewish
Yes.
Charities?
Yes, they did.
In other words,
and they contributed through the shuls, see, the congregations. We had rabbis who were very active and worked very hard.
Who were the rabbis that were?
Well, we had the cantors were outstanding. We had one cantor called Bapchik. He was known all over. Sing. The rabbis, Rabbi Hirschman later was one of the community leaders. Rabbi Leo Franklin of Temple Bethel was a community leader back from the days of my childhood. Did a good job, worked with the United Jewish Charities, and was outstanding. I just can't call to mind.
Rabbi Leo Franklin was one of the very early.
I just mentioned it. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. From what elements in the Jewish community did most of the people come? Were they mostly related to the synagogue?
I would say most of them were related to the synagogue and the temple. See?
Yeah.
And they functioned mainly through that source.
Would you say that your own influence came to participate in community activity?
I think my participation in the community came from the shul, the congregation. I think I got my basis and foundation. Peculiarly, I had never eaten non-kosher meat until my junior year at the University of Michigan because I couldn't get it there. Subsequently, after I got out of school, there was a shul called the Taylor Street Shul, which I attended. They had a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Ashinsky. Originally came from Pittsburgh. My father was a vice president of that shul at one time. I attended the services once and I heard a sermon delivered by Rabbi Ashinsky on kosher and non-kosher. That sermon impressed me so much that I have never knowingly since that time eaten non-kosher food. Not that I'm strictly kosher, but I've never eaten non-kosher meat or food by that sermon. Yes. Yeah.
Your parents were very involved.
My parents were very pious, religious, strictly kosher. My mother wouldn't answer a telephone on Shabbos. And my mother, when Schwartz put seating of men and women together, she wouldn't sit with the men. She sat alone on the side. My mother was 100% religious.
Were you actually, as a youth, active in your synagogue?
Yes. I was active all the time in the synagogue.
That was really your first organizational
that's right.
involvement?
Yes.
How did you become involved in the organized Jewish community on a leadership level? In what organization did you become involved?
Look, to become involved on a so-called leadership level in a Jewish organization, first one must love his fellow man. And one must feel that he cannot live alone, that he's a part of the community, and must, by assisting the community, help himself. So it just comes naturally. And you just go on from one organization to another.
What was the first organized group that you became involved in?
I think it was in the Hannah Schloss building as a president of one of the clubs. See? And today we have an Old Timers organization in Detroit, which I have been president, whose membership has consisted of boys who played and lived really in the old Hannah Schloss building. We call it the Hannah Schloss Old Timers.
Who are some of the people in that group?
Oh, there is Abe Schmier is active in the group. Large number of boys are in the group.
And you kept your contact?
Oh, yes.
It's almost like a lobster
Yes.
shop.
And we have raised money. We raised money and gave it to the Federation for the center building on Curtis. We have a room, the Hannah Schloss Old Timers room there, and they're raising money to give additional money to the Federation towards the new center.
Tell me this, could you tell me a little about your involvement in the Jewish Welfare Federation? During what periods have you served?
Oh, well, I have served in the Federation so long, I can't remember how far it goes back. I've been chairman of the campaigns. I've received the Butzel Award. I was chairman of the emergency campaign in the Israel War. And I was secretary of Sinai Hospital from the day it was organized for 25 years. As a matter of fact, I was one of the original organizers of Sinai Hospital. I've been interested in the Hebrew schools. I was interested in the Hillel at the University of Michigan, was president of the Hillel for a number of years. As a matter of fact, the congregation, the Hillel at the University of Michigan, is named after my father and mother, Oliver Sholem. Hebrew School on 7 Mile Road is named after my father and mother, Oliver Sholem. And I've been interested vitally in B'nai B'rith and the Hillel movement. I've gotten an honorary degree from Bar-Ilan University of Israel, J.D. from the University of Michigan, and I've worked with all of the Jewish organizations. As a matter of fact, with the non-Jewish organization. I've been president of the Urban League of Detroit twice. I've been president of the Detroit House of Correction twice. Been president of the City Plan Commission. Been president of other organizations, Jewish and non-Jewish.
It's quite a
Well,
record.
I feel since you love your fellow man, religion doesn't make a bit of difference, or race or creed.
Right.
You must love everybody.
Right. Let me ask you this, in relationship to the Jewish Welfare Federation itself, what are some of your outstanding memories of the some of the projects that that Federation has been involved in, some of the needs that it has had to meet through the years?
Federation, before Israel came into existence, did a great deal of work in the community. They serviced the teaching of children. They provided welfare organizations in Detroit with money. They had Jewish Center. They were instrumental in the hospital. And on a national basis, they furnished money to the national organizations because of the need of the Jews in Europe and all over the world. Now, of course, since Israel has come into being, they are, as other federations are, really the backbone of Israel. Without the federations, I don't think we could have had an Israel. And they are the place where money is gathered for Israel, not for arms, but for projects in Israel for the welfare of the people in Israel.
So that through these last years, the Federation has really had a two-way responsibility, local and Israeli.
Oh, there's no question about it. And they've helped national institutions. They contribute something to the B'nai B'rith and other organizations.
Let me ask you this: when you've known many among the leaders of Federation through the years, tell me something about some of the leaders, both both professional and the volunteer leadership.
Well, I recall Sobolov very well. I think he did a terrific job as a director of the Federation.
Let's see, what years was he at Federation?
Well, he came before Avrunin. He probably has been out, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. Sobi did a terrific job. He really...
What was he like?
Well, he was a hard worker, used good judgment, and people liked him. And when you like somebody, you work for him. In the past, we've had presidents of the Federation who've been very earnest in their work. Lately, we've had outstanding international, if you may call that, Jews who've been president of the Federation. Take Max Fisher as far as Israel is concerned, Paul Zuckerman as far as Israel is concerned. We've really brought up some very fine Jews in the Federation.
Max Fisher has really become a real national...
Well, to me, Max Fisher is the national, international Jew of the world. That's what I think of him. Paul Zuckerman has done a job second to none as far as Israel is concerned. Devoted most of his time to Israel. Outstanding. And we have Jews who, in Detroit, who've come out of the Federation, that are interested in Bar-Ilan University, Yeshiva University, Zionist organization, Tel Aviv University and Hebrew University, the Technion, and all these institutions. And the people of Detroit who have devoted their time to these institutions all came out of the Federation. See?
Let me ask you this, specifically in relationship to the Jewish Welfare Federation. What has been your role? I know that you have been campaign director.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been a worker. I've worked in the vineyards primarily to raise money. And I have gone in the highways and byways to get the money to keep the Federation going and keep the institutions throughout the world going. That's been my role.
That has been your major role. Let me ask you this. You have had some involvement with the Hebrew Free Loan.
Oh, yeah. I was president of the Hebrew Free Loan. I was very active in the Hebrew Free Loan for many, many years.
When did you start?
Oh, I don't know, 20, 25 years or more ago. And they've always done a good job furnishing the poor money without interest. We furnished money to poor people to bring their relatives from Europe to get what we call shifts tickets. And the Hebrew Free Loan Association has done a terrific job. The Ehrlichs were very much interested in the Hebrew Free Loan. Dora Ehrlich was an outstanding woman in the city of Detroit. She was really a national figure. Wonderful. Now, if you go and look at the various buildings in Israel of institutions, you will find the names on plaques of many, many Detroit Jews.
Is that right?
Yeah. Dora Ehrlich was a sweetheart. Her sister was my Sunday school teacher many, many years ago.
Who was her sister?
Just a minute. I'm trying to recall her name.
Because Dora Ehrlich's name to me is
Yeah.
one of long memory.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We had wonderful Jewish women who assisted their husbands and went, in my opinion, beyond their husbands in the work they've done.
I did not realize that Dora Ehrlich was involved with the Hebrew Free
Oh,
Loan
yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Tell me this, was the Hebrew Free Loan formed in the very early period?
Oh, in the early years.
Uh-huh.
Many,
The
many years
recognition
ago.
of
Yeah.
the need for-
They call it Gemil's Chesed.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Who were some of the other leaders in that group besides Dora Ehrlich?
Well, Maurice Landau, whose widow is in Detroit, whose son and daughter in Detroit, played a terrific role in the Hebrew Free Loan Association. Oh, there were many.
What role does the group play now?
What?
What role does the Hebrew Free Loan play
The
now?
Hebrew Free Loan Association is still in existence, and it helps people who do not have a lump sum to send to their relatives in Europe, or to try to bring them out of Europe, or to assist relatives in Israel, and they pay back on a monthly or weekly basis, all without interest and all without cost. They're still functioning.
So that, in other words, throughout these years, there's
Yeah.
always been a need
Yeah.
in the community.
The Zeman family was an outstanding family in the Jewish community. The Wetzman family, whose children are still here and grandchildren, see. Sally Davidson was a Wetzman girl. Billy Davidson is a Wetzman grandson. They played a terrific role in the community.
Let me ask you this, in connection with the Hebrew Free Loan, what with the what seems to be a rising group among the Jews with economic needs today, do you foresee that the Hebrew Free Loan might take on even added significance?
The way things are going now, with conditions as they are, a large number of Jews who had acquired enough to live on their balance of their life through owning real estate have found that their real estate was located in the wrong spots, has deteriorated, and they're going to need money. And I feel that the Hebrew Free Loan will play a much bigger role in the near future than it has in the last 10, 15, or 20 years. I really do.
Is it, how is it administered now? Is it a separate, does it have
It's a separate institution, and it gets part of its upkeep from the Federation to maintain itself. Yes.
I see. Is it located
In the Federation building.
I see.
Yeah.
See.
Years ago we had a separate office. Yeah.
So that throughout the years, this is a group that has really played a role in meeting
No
the
question
needs
about
of,
it. It has.
Of the community members. Now, how about United Hebrew Schools? I know that you have had...
Well, I went to the first United Hebrew School in Detroit on Division Street, between Beaubien and Antwine. Maury Zakheim, who I mentioned before, was one of the Hebrew teachers in this school. Dr. Baruch. And we really got a wonderful Hebrew education. But along with our Hebrew education, we got a religious education, which seems to be somewhat lacking today in the Hebrew schools. We not only learn to pray and to read and write, but we learn what prayer was for and what the religion was about. It was run strictly on I would say, an Orthodox basis at that time. And then it branched out. We got an education, the kids who went to this Hebrew school on Division Street, second to none. That's where we got our religious inspiration.
Was that under the auspices of Federation?
At first it wasn't, but later came into the Federation, yes. Yeah.
I see.
Then they had a Hebrew school on Farnsworth, I remember. They branched out in the various localities. They had one out in the Oakland division when the Jews were living out, as the Jews moved out from the lower inner city. See, Jews travel very fast. They live in an area for maybe 10 years, and then they move to another area.
And the resources followed
That's
the
right.
Jewish
right.
population.
That is right.
Did you move with the, what was your...
Well, we lived in the original area where the Jews were congregated, north of Gratiot Avenue, while I was going to the University of Michigan. Then we moved to Warren Avenue, out further, and we lived on Bethune, 2 blocks north of where the General Motors building was erected when I graduated the University of Michigan. Yeah.
So that you followed and moved along too. Okay, now back to the United Hebrew Schools. When did you become active as not as a student, but your involvement with the United Hebrew Schools as a leader?
Oh, I became involved with Jewish institutions in Detroit, I would say, within 5 years after I graduated the University of Michigan.
And your involvement with the Hebrew schools is
and with the Hebrew schools and all of them.
I see.
Yeah.
What special needs do you feel the United Hebrew schools were called upon to meet during the time of your involvement?
Well, they were called upon to teach the children Hebrew and to read and write and to learn prayers. And they gave them the Hebrew education, which you did not get in the grammar school or in the regular grade schools. And there's where the kids got their Hebrew education. Then later years, of course, some of the congregations opened their own Hebrew schools, which were operated under the direction of the United Hebrew Schools and were really part of the United Hebrew Schools.
Let me ask you this: who were some of the lay and professional leaders that you remember as playing a real role in the United Hebrew Schools?
I tell you, it's hard to remember who they were. See, but you go back years ago, you found practically every prominent Jew was interested in United Hebrew Schools.
because they felt the need
Yeah,
for...
because they felt the need for the education. See, originally, when I was a kid, we had cheters, little private teachers who ran their own little schools. And when I first started to go to Hebrew school, I was maybe 6, 7 years of age. It was back of the shul on Mount Common Hastings Street. And the rabbi who ran it, we called him the Rota Malamed, or Red Whiskers, because he had long red whiskers. And let me tell you, he gave us an education that was out of the world. When we didn't learn, it was beaten into us, but we got it. Now, you find people like the Sariris who are prominent in the city of Detroit. The Sariri boys went to the Rota Malamed. Schiffman, a lot of people who became prominent hamburgers in Jewish life all got their foundation from Red Whiskers.
Is that so?
Oh, yes. We really got it. Both ways.
What, in relationship to the United Hebrew Schools, what role have you played? I know that you have, there is a building that is named after your...
Well, I was on the board of the United Hebrew Schools for many years. I've contributed substantial sums to the United Hebrew Schools for the erection of a Hebrew school and to sustain them. And I've been vitally interested in the United Hebrew Schools because I believe that Hebrew education is very essential to preserving Jews and Judaism.
There, in the past, there, in terms of community planning, not everyone was always that sure that the languages of the past should be maintained. So is that not true?
Well, yes, but I have found in the last 10, 15 years that to preserve Jews and Judaism, you must have religion. And you must have religion in the schools. It's very essential. And I think more people are beginning to recognize this. We have independent schools in Detroit where children are taught to read, write Hebrew, and also religion. And I think they're very essential to the welfare of the future of Jews and Jewry. Because I feel to save Jews just because they're Jews does not mean anything. To save them without their religion, in my opinion, is meaningless. I think the religion is a thing that made the Jews, is an integral part of the Jews, and should be preserved and maintained. And that is the way the Jews really can accomplish things and make themselves worthwhile in the world.
So that, in other words, you don't feel that there is this question anymore today that...
As far as I'm concerned, I'm 100% for Jewish religious education. Not 100%, 1,000%. And I'm backing it, and I'm in love with it. And I think it's very essential to the welfare of Jews and Judaism.
Let's talk a little also about Sinai Hospital. You've had contact there for many years also, have you not?
I remember Sinai Hospital, Israel Davidson, Max Osnes, and myself sat down in a hotel room in downtown Detroit, and we helped the start from that little session of Sinai Hospital. Years before they had started to promote a Jewish hospital in Detroit, had collected a sum of money but never went any further. I really feel that because of that meeting of the three of us, it was the beginning of Sinai Hospital. Later we interested a number of people, including Maury Aronson and others, and we promoted the hospital. I also remember when we bought the land on Curtis, where the hospital is. There was some 30 acres, I believe, to be bought. And some of the people connected with the hospital thought that was too much land. They only wanted 11 acres or 10 acres. And a number of us talked to the board. We convinced them to buy the 38 acres And if later they didn't want or need the land, we would take the remainder off their hands. Well, we never got that opportunity. As a matter of fact, the 38 acres isn't sufficient. And it was very fortunate that we bought the 38 acres instead of buying a much smaller parcel. I spent a great deal of time, effort in helping to build Sinai Hospital, and I'm proud of the hospital. I think it is a wonderful institution, well conducted, and run very efficiently, and doing a wonderful medical job in research and otherwise.
It's really growing.
It's a credit to everybody. Well, it's grown beyond our belief.
There was real foresight on the part of those who felt that
That's
the land, that there should be more land. Let me ask you this. What special needs do you feel that the hospital has played in this community?
I think the hospital has helped not only Jews, the entire community, by giving them wonderful medical care. I think that the doctors in our community have gotten a great deal as a result of the founding of Sinai Hospital. I think the other hospitals in the community have gotten a great deal from Sinai Hospital. So I think the entire area, including Jew and non-Jew, has really benefited materially from the research in Sinai, from the doctors who have functioned in Sinai, who have become better doctors as a result of Sinai Hospital. And so that it has played an integral part in the great medical operations that we have in the city of Detroit. I remember distinctly we have a strictly kosher kitchen in Sinai Hospital. Fred Butzel, who was one of the great leaders in our community, the Butzel Ward is named after him. The Butzel family.
Please turn this tape onto side 2. This is side 2 on this first tape.
Has been outstanding in our community with reference to Sinai Hospital. Fred Butzel, who was a Reformed Jew, who did not observe kashrus, was the first man to make the statement, we must have a strictly kosher kitchen in Sinai Hospital for those who desire it. Fred Butzel, as a matter of fact, his name is synonymous with Detroit Jewry. I know that when I went to lunch with him, he would say to me, Irwin, do you have any objection if I eat non-kosher meat? Do you have any objection if I have milk with my meat? Always would say that to me before he would eat anything. He played a big role in the Jewish orphan home we had, Jewish children's home. I was president of the Jewish children's home. Yes. And we did a terrific job. There was a Herman Cohen in Detroit who did a terrific job in the Jewish children's home. And we functioned well until the question of foster homes came up, and that did away with the necessity for the Jewish children's home.
Did you feel that it was valid to close the home at that time?
Well, at first I didn't think it was, but I finally felt that to put a child into a home with foster parents was better than keeping them in a children's home.
You know, I worked at Fresh Air Camp as a counselor at the year that the home was closing, and some of the children were at camp awaiting the plan for foster homes. I remember that very, very well.
As a matter of fact, where the camp is today, in Oakland County, is it Oakland County?
Yeah, Tamarack.
Camp Tamarack. I found that property.
Is that so?
A man came to me and wanted to sell me that property. And I went out and looked at it, my wife and I. We fell in love with it. My wife says, you know, this would be the ideal location for a Jewish camp. I communicated with Sobolov. And Sobolov and Shaw, who is still with the Federation, and myself, we went out there and looked at the land. And as a result, the Federation bought the property. The man who owned it was a non-Jew, and when he found the Federation wanted to buy it, he gave him a better price than he wanted to give to a private individual. And the camp, to me, the location and its operation is ideal.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. I keep finding out more things that you've been involved in. I did not know that you were.
Can't remember.
I did not know that you were involved in the Jewish Children's Home.
I was present.
Yeah, do you tell me a little bit about that, because I have talked with no one who's discussed that Jewish.
Well, the
Children's Home
Jewish Children's Home ended up with a gymnasium. How did they get the gymnasium furnished? My income tax one year was examined, and as a result, I got a considerable rebate from the government. So I used the money to furnish the gymnasium and the Jewish children's camp with money that I didn't expect to get back. It was an interesting operation. We taught the kids Hebrew in the Jewish Children's Home. We had services, and they were really given everything that they missed in life except parents.
Were most of these youngsters children who were away from their parents temporarily, or?
Some of them were away from their parents temporarily, and some of them who had lost their parents, or technically had been abandoned by their parents. And we made mention out of them. I think to take a child and do good for a child is probably as good a mitzvah as there is in the world, because a child can't do it for itself, doesn't have the ability, and needs that help. So the Jewish Children's Home functioned for many years and did a real fine job.
Were you involved when it was on Petoskey?
Oh, yes.
That was the period.
That's right.
Was there a home before that?
Yes. There was. I don't remember where, but I think it was near Brush Street. Now, take the old folks' home. It was on Brush, I think corner Erskine. And I was interested in that.
Were you at that
To take care of aged is a wonderful mitzvah. Yeah. We had a big brick house. Yeah.
So that no matter which service I talk about, perhaps I would find that you have had some involvement.
Well, you see, I remember a fellow like Joe Holtzman, who was very active. The names are coming back to me now in the community. I remember when Joe Holtzman's mother stood on the street corner with a handkerchief collecting quarters, dimes, and nickels to build out the Yeshiva Beth Yehuda, which was named after Rabbi Judah Levine, who was the outstanding Orthodox rabbi in Detroit. The Seruri family was outstanding. As you talk, these names start coming back to you. Maury Aronson was active in promoting the Sinai Hospital. And
let me ask you this. You've been in the hub of the Jewish community for such a long time. Are there many families where the generations have in the younger generations have involved themselves also
yes,
in
lots
community
of them.
activities?
Lots of them. You find a lot of the workers today, the men who are vitally interested in the community, come from the parents who were active years ago. Of course, we have a large number of Jews active in the community and its affairs who were not born in Detroit, who've come from elsewhere. The number of native born who are active, I would say, are in the minority.
In other words, they became active and
That's
and
right.
involved themselves.
Yeah.
I see. Who are some of the family that would be so interesting to almost have a family tree of relationships? Who are some of the people that are very involved today?
Well, you take Mandel Berman. Mandel Berman comes from the Berman family that was in Detroit when I was a kid. His grandfather was J. Berman, who had a wholesale clothing store in Gratiot Avenue, not far from where my father was in business. Mandel comes from that family. The Satowski boys, their father was an old-timer in Detroit. And they're quite a number. But most of them today, well, you take Dr. Harry August is related. His wife is a Schetzer girl. Jacob Keiden's wife is a Schetzer girl. Came from the Schetzer family from way back, who were prominent. The Kaidens were very prominent in the growth of the city of Detroit. The grandfather originally was in the wholesale dry goods business on Hastings near Gratiot, and they played a very vital role in the growth of the city of Detroit. I just can't remember, but as you go on, they come back to me.
I think you mentioned when we talked that Judge Rubner is a cousin.
Charlie Rubner is a cousin of mine. His mother was a sister of Ike Schetzer, who was one of the leaders of Detroit. But Charlie was born in northern Michigan, not Detroit, but came here as a young chap. And a large number of the people are interwoven. A. Jacobs was a very prominent Jew in Detroit. He was president of Schwartz and Cohn, a hard worker. He still has a son. Royal Oppenheim is married to a granddaughter of A. Jacobs. Now, the Oppenheim family was prominent. David Oppenheim, who was Royal's father, was as fine a Jewish worker and individual as ever lived in Detroit. You go way back, and these families, the names come back to you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that there are so many interrelationships.
Well, there are a lot of descendants here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Regina Oppenheim, who I believe has worked with it was the Jewish Social Service Bureau at the time. She's, an adoption worker, and took that form
Matter of fact,
interest.
Royal Oppenheim's grandfather, Dave Oppenheim's father, Jacob Oppenheim, I remember he had a little beard, and he worked for my father. He drove the horse and wagon, delivery wagon, for my father. Little Jewish fellow with a little beard, 100% pious. What a sweet man. Yeah.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. In reviewing your many years of activity in the Jewish community, what would you say have been some of the highlights in relationship to the community?
Well, the Frank family, whose children are here, Sam Frank, Harry Frank, were prominent good workers in the Jewish community. The highlights in the Jewish community, well, of course, the highlight was when I got the Butzel Award.
Right.
And I got an honorary degree from Bar-Ilan University. And I've gotten a Humanities Award from B'nai B'rith. And I've gotten a lot of different awards. You get a kick out of all of them because you have a little bit to show for it. Or the chairmanships, the dinners I presided at. Golda Meir dinner in Detroit, formal dinner before she was the head of Israel. And you go all the way back to all these. People who were later became big leaders. We had dinners for them before they reached their heights. Then I've been active in the non-Jewish community. And I get a kick out of all this. I enjoy people, love people, and I enjoy helping them. That's my religion. As a matter of fact, somebody asked me the other day, what is my definition of religion? I said, my definition of religion is love thy fellow man. That includes everybody.
That's right. Yeah.
Women too, by the way.
Great.
Yeah.
That's
Now I'm vitally interested in the Lubavitcher movement. I love them. I think they're the most sincere Jews in the world, and I think they're doing a terrific job to preserve Jewry and its religion. I love these people.
I just got a note from Pearl Biber because she is collecting for
Pearl Biber's
the rummage.
She's a wonderful worker, a wonderful, sincere woman. She's interested in the Lubavitcher.
Yes, she is.
Of course, I've been vitally interested in Israel and its welfare. I would like to see more religion over there, but I'm an American, not an Israeli, so I can't criticize.
Can't influence that part, right?
Yeah.
What specifically have you done in relationship to Israel? What work have you done?
Well, I've been chairman of the campaigns for Israel. I've been to Israel 9 or 10 times. I've supported every institution in Israel. I've been fortunate enough to be able to contribute to them and have done so. And I just had a meeting recently with President Katzer of Israel where I presented the Lubavitcher Rebbe to him. And Israel is part of my life.
You go there frequently?
I've been there 9 or 10 times.
Is that right?
Expect to go again in September. Yes.
That's wonderful. Let me ask you this. How do you see the Jewish community today with regard to its needs, problems, and goals?
Well, I see in the city of Detroit today a number of younger men in their 40s and 50s who are working with the Federation and working with other Jewish organizations in the community that are going to outdo, in my opinion, what has been done in the past. I like two Hebrew words, ani ma'amin, I have faith. And I have faith that the Jewish community is going to go to much greater heights than it has. And the welfare of the Jews, the Jewish people, the welfare of our community is in mighty good hands when I see the number of fine men we have who are really doing a job.
Who are some of these people that you're referring to?
Well, you have David Hermelin, you have Richard Sloan, you have Billy Wetzman, you have, thank God, my own son, and a large number of David Pollock, and these people, Moore Aronson's son. I didn't mention Nate Shapiro's name, who has done a terrific job in the community, who's been a backbone of Sinai Hospital, just as Max Osnes has been. And Milt Madden is doing a good job as president of Sinai Hospital. You have some of the younger people that are coming up, and let me tell you, they are terrific. They're outstanding. Harold Berry, Lou Berry has done a wonderful job in the community. George Seaburn, who is one of the finest men in the community, has quietly done a terrific job in the community. And you go over all the list of all these people, you must have faith that the Jewish community in Detroit is going to greater heights. You got Alan Schwartz, who happens to be a law partner of mine, has done a terrific job in the community. Jack Miller, another partner of mine, is doing a terrific job. These people...
You must encourage them to...
What?
You must influence
well,
them.
they're terrific. They're coming up the ladder and doing wonderful work. Wonderful work.
Where do you think the community needs to go?
Where's what?
Where do you think the Jewish community needs to go? What do you think?
I think the Jewish community of Detroit needs one thing, more than anything else, more Jewish religion. And I want to say this. I think the rabbis, generally speaking in Detroit, the rabbis of the Reformed temples, to me, are sincere, fine men, doing a good job. I think Rabbi Siegel, Rabbi Groner, the Orthodox rabbis, Rabbi Levine, Rabbi Grubner, are wonderful men doing a good job in the community. And I have faith in the majority of the rabbis. Some of them I do not agree with, but that's par for the course. I like cohesion. I like people who work together. I do not like controversy. And I think that generally speaking, the Reform, the Conservative, and the Orthodox rabbis are getting along very well in the community, thank the Lord, and are fine people, sincere and honest in what they are doing.
And what about in relationship to some of the other social needs? Where do you see the community needing?
Well, right now, you need to help the large number of poor Jews in the community. I think there are a larger number of poor Jews now than there have been for years because of general conditions. I think we need to establish more apartment buildings like the one we have. I think it's a mistake to have only built one. I think the Jews have to build more retirement homes for people who do not want just charity but need assistance in living. And I think we've been lacking in that. I think we've been lacking in Hebrew religious education. We need more. And generally speaking, though, the community has done a very fine job.
What about in relationship to the young, to our young people?
Well, we must try to furnish a service for young people that will attract them. I think the difficulty we have with young children is in the home. I think the community has the wherewithal to work with them. But I don't think the parents are doing the job. I think parents are neglecting, generally speaking, the welfare of their children. You would be surprised how many young children in the community that I've heard of recently who are bringing their parents to religion, bringing their parents forward, bringing their parents to real religion. I was talking with a woman the other day, very well off, they're retired. Their son is bringing them to kosher in the house, to religion observance. I know another one from a very prominent family whose young kid has gotten the touch of religion and is bringing them into religion. By the way, we have the Niederlander family in Detroit that's well known. Their grandfather was Joe Niederlander. I remember him when I was a kid. Fine man, fine worker. Did a good job in the community. Now, you've got to get some of these people who are descendants to get more involved in a Jewish life, Jewish way of life, religious way of life. I don't care whether it's conservative, orthodox, or reform, but to do it sincerely and to become active.
And to keep the identity in this.
That's right.
Mr. Cohn, I appreciate the time you've given, and what we've talked about has, I'm sure, added to the memories of the Jewish community in this city and your role in it, which has been an important one.
Well, can I say one more statement?
Of course.
I get a kick of the first organized United Jewish Charities. And their first annual meeting, which was in 1899, or 1900, the year 1899 to 1900. And I note in the list of contributions, my father gave $7.
Which was probably a very good...
I could name you people who gave money, who have descendants in our community, are listed in here. $5, $10, $7, $3. And that was the beginning of the organized charity in Detroit. And I get a kick out of this list and noting the descendants who are still active in the community, some of whom have become very wealthy. And I also want to call attention that Rabbi Leo Franklin, who I mentioned, he was the chairman
of the United Jewish Charities, which was how it all began, the
That's
organized
right.
part.
That's right.
It's been an interesting history, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's really been wonderful. There's an old Rosenthal family that were outstanding Jews and workers of the community. They have descendants. There's a number of the girls in Detroit.
Who right now?
Well, there's one whose husband is called, his name is Samar, S-A-M-A-R, I believe. Her father was called the religious Isaac. He was 100% religious, a hard worker, wonderful man who promoted the welfare of the city of Detroit. Another daughter is named Eisenberg, E-I-S-E-N-B-E-R-G, Florence Eisenberg. They have a son who's in Detroit. Mandel Berman was a descendant of him. And you go down the list, and you find these Jews were terrific, terrific. And they built the city of Detroit. And Detroit can be very, very thankful for having these people and the type. The Anguses were good workers in the community. George Blumenthal, who's in the community, has a sister, a descendant of Blumenthal, who was active in the welfare of the community. The Agashevitzes, whose descendants are now called Shevitzes, or Shaw family, and August family, they were a big part in the building of the city of Detroit. Jewish community.
And you probably knew many of these people from your
I knew
growing up.
all the old timers, every one of them. And I knew them all because I went to shul, and I met them in the shuls. And on Yontif, used to walk from one shul to the other. I probably ended up in the 4 or 5 shuls we had in the community, walking from one to the other.
And we weren't as spread out as we are now.
No. Of course, today we're all over Wayne, Oakland County, Genesee County. You have them all over. All over. But we really had a fine Jewish community. Did a wonderful work. The Heineman family played a terrific part in the building of the city of Detroit. The Schloss family, I do not know whether any descendants now, but they played a big part. The Sloman family played a big part. You go through the list, and you meet them all.
That's great. Anything else we should be talking?
Gott sei Dank.
Okay. I thank you a great deal.